Hello everyone, I am Dr. Wolf, and it's good to be helping. Last time I talked about why so many people seem to think that it's impossible to get out of debt, that they just become resigned to it, and how I want to encourage people to get out of that mindset, that it's not impossible, that it can be done if you are able to take a certain number of steps and dedicate yourself to it for enough time. But today, I wanted to start with a very simple phrase. Comparison is the thief of joy. Think about that for just a moment. It seems fairly simple at first, but maybe a little complicated the more you get into it. The more you compare yourself to others, the more unhappy it makes your life in the long run. Imagine how many different circumstances you can put yourself in, that the more you compare yourself to the accomplishments of other people, and how unhappy it can make you in your own accomplishments. And I want to put that in regards to your own financial independence. It applies to so many facets of life, but I want to put it specifically towards financial independence because of another very simple phrase. Keeping up with the Joneses. And a lot of you may have heard of that one already. It's a very common phrase that a lot of people have been using over the years. It's basically whenever you see some other family, some other couple, some friend, some family member, they get something that's new and improved, something cutting edge, something that's state of the art, and you feel like you've got to have it because they've got it. And this is very commonplace amongst the entire world, that because someone else has it, you have to have it too. And this creates a mindset, a habit, that really has no end. Whenever you get something that someone else has, and you can have that feeling of accomplishment, how long does it take before something else comes along that someone else buys, and then suddenly you feel like, well, now I gotta have that thing too? It's really an endless cycle, the more you think about it, isn't it? And it goes back to that simple phrase that I started with. Comparison is the thief of joy. The more you compare with what others have to what you have, the more it robs you of the happiness that you have in your own life. And the more you feel unhappy with your own life, the more like you feel, I have to have stuff to make me feel better about it. And that's a shame. That is such a shame that so many people seem to feel like they need that. My lady and I, like I mentioned in the previous video on finances, we managed to pay off our house before the age of 35. And part of that was that we didn't care quite so much about keeping up with the Joneses, as the saying goes. That even though a lot of other people were buying these brand new expensive toys, these state-of-the-art hip new things that were just popular in the now, you gotta have it because everybody else had it kind of things. We didn't care so much about those things. It wasn't a big deal for us. And because we didn't develop those kind of habits, we were able to devote so much more of what we earned towards getting out of debt. And this was a habit we were able to build over many years. And this is something that I want to encourage many of you out there to be able to learn little by little, bit by bit. And can I take a little bit of a moment here and everybody enjoy the scenery in the background? This is a walk that I take a lot of the days because it's so close to where I work. There's this lovely little river that's right along this path that people use for walking and biking, and nice little bridge. It's very serene. It's very good for clearing one's mind. I might have to use this more often when I'm doing these kind of videos. But getting back to the subject at hand, if you can separate yourself from this kind of mindset, separate yourself from comparing your accomplishments to those from others, always needing to feel like because someone else has this, I have to have it too. You can start to realize that you can feel so much happier in your own accomplishments, regardless of what you have. When you stop competing with everyone else and instead start competing with yourself. It reminds me of a bit of a business story from several years back, more than a decade back. This was between two tech giants, Microsoft and Apple. Now, back in the mid-2000s, Apple were developing their iPod products. And this was pretty new at the time, but it was a really, really big deal because no one had ever done anything like this before. And everybody wanted to get into this, especially Microsoft. And they were developing their similar product, which maybe a lot of you younger people may not recognize the name, but they had a product called the Zune, which, if you look back and compare the products, the Zune was not that bad of a product. It was technically superior in a lot of ways to what Apple was releasing at the time. And yet when you think back now, the Zune is a relic that just disappeared. No one cares about the Zune anymore. It doesn't exist in the minds of today. And I bring it up because when Microsoft was developing their Zune, they were obsessed about what Apple was doing with their iPod all the time. Every time there was something new coming out with their iPod, new application of their technology, new software updates, new little intricacies, Microsoft would immediately get on it and try to come up with something to compete against it. They would come up with something to compete around it. They would try to always one-up their competition. They would always try to think, how can we beat Apple? Apple, on the other hand, they weren't concerned about what Microsoft was doing, believe it or not. In their company meetings, they weren't spending their time looking over what the Zune was or what Microsoft was doing in the market. Apple was instead trying to teach their employees about how to compete with what the products they had already made. They were trying to improve upon themselves. They were trying to think, how can we do better than what we've already done? They weren't comparing themselves with the rest of the market. They were competing with themselves. And looking back at that now, I find that kind of strategy brilliant. They didn't think quite so handily about what Microsoft was doing all the time, and instead Microsoft, so much of the time, were obsessed with what Apple was doing all the time. And maybe it wasn't just that part of their marketing or their overall plan that caused their downfall, but I have to believe that was a significant portion of why the Zune failed and the iPod succeeded. And again, it goes back to that very simple phrase. Comparison is the thief of joy. People are always obsessed about keeping up with the Joneses. If you can separate yourself from that mindset, if you can think for a moment about how can I better who I am and not think about how can I be better to how this person was or how this person is. How can I have what this other person has? Compete against yourself instead of everyone else. Don't worry about what everyone else has, especially when it comes to always having the hip new thing, the popular thing, the brand new technological thing. It's not as important as you might think it is. And especially when it comes to getting out of debt, it's the kind of endless cycle that I see countless people getting themselves into. Because to them, that'll always be important. That'll always be more important to have this next big thing than getting out of debt for the rest of their lives. But let me know what each of you think about that. Until next time, I am Dr. Wolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.